Hello, BookTube. Hello, wallowers and swallowers and Joe Spivey followers. I have a guest today. This is Joe Spivey from the eponymous BookTube channel, Joe Spivey. How are things in the north of England?
Oh, very dark, very dull, very wet, very gloomy, sea rocky, the lot. I needn't go on. It's terrible here, but there we are.
I was going to do a string of interviews of Zoom chat BookTube interviews today, but one by one, obligations have taken them away, including young Micah Cummins, who realized at the last minute that he had a conflict of interest because he had to go rock climbing.
Oh goodness, why is it people do these physical activities, Steve?
I,
Why is it they risk that on a
oh,
daily basis?
I wasn't going to dwell over long on the fact that I lost out to a rock, but I was going to use it as a springboard to ask you, does Joe Spivey do anything in the way of physical exercise? No.
Yeah,
No?
well, I've got a bit of a stated history with road cycling, with serious racing cycling, the type that Lance Armstrong and Eddie Merckx used to do. So I feel as if I feel as if I've crammed all of my exercise in between the ages of, what would we say, 15 and 19. I happily did 300 miles a week, sort of 25 hours out on these horrible wet roads of England, racing in, up and down the country, race abroad, the lot. I've done much cardiovascular activity like that. I've done bits of running in between. I played rugby bits and bobs at school, as a sort of a boyish young gentleman would do. But beyond that, for maybe about 3 years now, since COVID hit, I haven't done any activity whatsoever apart from walking myself to the bookstores, as is well documented.
And when you talk about the roads of England up in the north, any credence to the persistent folklore of a large cat that lives in northern England? A large black cat, much bigger than a house cat, a wild cat of some kind?
I have no idea if such a thing has been spotted, then it's a man in a costume. I have no idea. I've never documented it. I've been out on every single road, every single corner, and I've never run into such a thing. Many a goblin and horrid human being that tries to elbow you from the road in a car or whatever, but nothing fictional like that.
Now behind you, you have your now legendary bookcase. The less said about the creepy elf, the better. But you have your now legendary bookcase, which for those of you who don't subscribe to Joe Spivey's channel, you obviously should. I'll leave a link to it down below. But he's been doing a shelf tour, and it has been remarkable for a couple of reasons. One is that it largely features writers who are currently very much out of fashion. The late 20th century aughts boys club writers. There have been a couple of exceptions. It seems to me that your shelf really doesn't have many examples from that set who are still alive. It seems like to make Joe Spivey's selection from that group, you have to be dead. Like there's no Salman Rushdie, right? There's no Rushdie at all.
No, I've got one. I've got a Key Shot, which was his reinterpretation of Cervantes' Don Quixote. I've got and read bits of, but I can't remember much of it. No, there's next to no Rushdie. There is one Ian McEwan. There's no James Fenton. All of that lot that you would group in. I don't know whether they had a name, but they all met in a pub and got absolutely slaughtered every Thursday. I don't have many of them beyond Amos, to be honest. So you do have to be in the grave to feature.
Well, that's one of the remarkable ways is that you on BookTube you almost never hear those names being talked about. And the second remarkable way is that although they introduced you to the world of literature, they cast a spell on you, the spell wore off, which you're willing to frankly admit, which doesn't usually happen with men and the books they read. Hence the 8 million BookTube channels exclusively devoted to Stephen King.
Yeah.
It's perfectly okay. You say it in a couple of shelf tour videos. Perfectly okay if you to acknowledge, yes, this author opened the door for me. I might not have ever fallen under the spell of reading if not for this author. But that doesn't mean that this author is great or beyond criticism. What caused that? What caused? I mean, not so much what made you fall under the spell, but what made you, I don't know, turn a critical eye towards that?
Just mere breadth of reading. I attacked Amos with vengeance, and once you've read 6 or 7 of his works, and then you move on to something else, and as soon as it was just just to do with the breadth of my reading. As soon as you start reading some of the classics, as soon as you start reading, you know, Austen and Trollope and Eliot and all of the ones that we rightly deem to be axiomatically good, as opposed to just something based upon an opinion, then it's easy to see that it's nonsense. As soon if you easily get caught up in that world where he's navel gazing and, you know, talking about his sexual exploits and talking about, you know, how drunk he got last night and talking about how utterly useless the woman across the street is and how excellent his new piece of writing is that he's concocting is. As soon as you move beyond that and talk and suddenly women have eyes and ears and, you know, are able to agonize and have thoughts and feelings of their own, that's actually quite rather amazing and a bit more reflective of the world we live in, rather than just this bizarre gargoyle-esque 1980s stuff that Martin Amis seemed to evoke. So yeah, I still go back to it for a bit of fun, for a dopamine hit, but you know, I don't do it for you know, he's not a literary luminary for me anymore or anything like that. I just, you know, as I say, it's a bit of fun.
It was your channel that provoked me to revisit The Information by Martin Amis.
And
well, I mean, I agree on with one thing that you say just now, which is that there are long passages that are undeniably fun to read. They just have an incredible zest to them. But I also agree with the summation that you gave the book, which is that once you take a step back from that, if you're not reading purely for dopamine, once you take a step back from that, you realize that nothing happens. It's a totally ineffectual book. Nothing happens in it. Nothing's worth anything in it. It's just that. It's just a string of those dopamine hits. I don't know what to think about that. I honestly don't think you can say the same thing about the really well-controlled novels of his father. I honestly think there is something to the not the others. Kingsley Amis wrote a lot of books that are very much like his sons. Just the slosh in the whiskey glass. Just
well, he didn't stop writing, did he? He was whatever, he was 85, 90. He was crippled by alcohol addictions and all sorts of other things. And Martin Amis said himself he couldn't peel himself away from the typewriter, and so it was just complete claptrap and bilge that was being spewed out by the end. So there's no, you know, I've only read Lucky Jim, so I can't admit to being, you know, somewhat of an expert in his dad's works, but I'm sure that the majority of what he was doing was influenced, you know, Martin was influenced by Kingsley, so it's obvious that they reflect each other.
Lucky Jim, though, I mean, Lucky Jim has great one-liners. It has, of course, the one enormously successful comic set piece, but it is also a book. It is also about defeat. It is about something. And I wonder if Martin Amis, I mean, it's a hackneyed question to ask, but I wonder how much of his time as an adult writer he spent thinking, will I ever write that? Is any of the books that I'm writing here, are any of these books that? And now the Rachel Papers is 50 years old. so you're getting commemorative reprints and essays about the Rachel Papers. And people saying that it is that.
Well, yeah, I mean, as we say, the undeniable redeeming factor about his writing, obviously he was a great interviewee, but the undeniable redeeming factor about his writing is his non-fiction, which is absolutely stupendous. Whether it's about books, he was an excellent critic, or whether it's about Donald Trump or John Travolta or whoever that, you know, all of the other huge gatekeepers of the pornography industry, all of the other people that he interviewed. His non-fiction is inventive and idiosyncratic and vibrant and fun to read and is excellent. But I suppose non-fiction doesn't rely upon circularity or having much meaning to it. Of course, there's got to be a story embedded in there, but it doesn't require 4 or 5 different characters that you've got to nurse really carefully. And so if you just need to whap out 1,500 words by tomorrow for £2,000, then of course you can write a vivacious piece of non-fiction that is enjoyable without you know, spending 2 years doing an actual a consummate cogent novel. So I think that solves that as well.
That's how I was introduced to Amis. I was introduced to him through the Moronic Inferno, his book about America, and I loved it, just loved it, and thought, wow, this guy's novels are going to be something else. And I read London Fields. I thought, well, no, what's going on here? Is this the same person? Is this the same? The only reason that I knew it was the same person is because I think one of Amis's most noticeable failings as a writer is that he falls in love with, when he was 20, he fell in love with 31 words and cannot write without them. So they're always there in everything he writes. But Remind me again, did you like Inside Story?
It's been a while. I read it fresh when it came out. It's a signed copy here, folks.
Oh, wow.
I read it fresh when it came out. And it's what is it? It's called a novel, but it obviously isn't a novel. It's like experience. It's interspersed with bits about Larkin, about being his father, about Kingsley, about Christopher Hitchens, as per usual. So it's, I think it's jolly fine and it's really comfortable and it speaks to what you might expect from a genial old man who's lost much of his venom, which is what that's the conclusion I would come to. It is that it's safe and kind and something that he obviously knew he wouldn't be edited on, that he knew would be published, and he's not trying to prove anything anymore. But it's, yeah, genial and safe and a nice introduction for a new reader, but not something that was typical from it. Not something that, again, my yardstick for a decent book is if it was a 25-year-old nobody that was walking into a publishing house with this, would it be published? And of course, it wouldn't be. So that would be my conclusion.
Hmm. Wait a minute. Are you saying you're not hinting that you're a 25-year-old nobody?
No, no, no. I'm much younger.
You're a booktube star. Hardly
Yeah,
nobody.
well, Mark would have an excellent response to that because he's a cosmological expert as well. He would make some riff about supernovas if you were calling me a star.
Yeah, it was Inside Story was a very strange book. I was not prepared for how much it moved me. I don't know if that's because it's so much about endings. It's such an old man's book. And also, like you say, the venom is gone, and something I thought something very worthwhile had replaced it. Not still 100% sure what that is.
I'd have to go back. I haven't read it for a long time. I would have to go back to get a decent reasoning on
To
it.
attach the word wisdom to Martin Amis in any capacity. I hate to do that. So, but does how broadly did this extend this set of your formative reading? Just the usual suspects, or are there any people that were part of that gateway cadre of reading experiences that have stood re-examination?
Probably
Much
the
more Will Self.
yeah, Will Self.
Yes.
That name on my lips. Absolutely. The early stuff is ludicrous, as the titles would suggest, and they are, what is it Zadie Smith said about him? Will Smith's world is very much his own. So yeah, the first stuff is ludicrous, but the trilogy, Umbrella, Shark, and Phone, which I think he was basically was it basically a fly's eyelash away from winning the Booker. I think it was one particular. I know that's not much of a signal these days for acuity or general brilliance, but nonetheless, he was very close to winning the Booker with that. He wrote, what's the Walking to Hollywood is a great collection of sort of fictionalized non-fiction, because most of that happens to occur around Hornsey and Beverly and the sort of interstices near Hull where I live. So that's really interesting. But yeah, most of his stuff I don't read thinking, oh goodness, this is this is all sort of sophomoric undergraduate nonsense. He stood the test of time, most of it, and I read all of his weekly columns and things, and I think he's a serious thinker, capital S, capital T. So yeah, he's definitely stood the test of time.
What about Julian Barnes?
I don't think I know the only thing I know about Julian, well, two things I know about Julian Barnes was that he was the wife of the he was the wife of the literary agent that Amis sort of not stabbed in the back, but had a riff with. But no, I can't say I've ever read a word of Julian Barnes's fiction.
My. What about Zadie Smith?
Yeah, I've got. I thought White Teeth was pretty good. A bit exhaustive. She was trying too hard to prove herself, but I thought it was pretty good. And I've got On Beauty which I enjoyed. I hadn't read Howard's End. Everybody always says that it's some sort of allegory of that. I've not read Howard's End, so I wouldn't know about that. And then I've also got NW, which I thought was absolutely terrible. Yeah, so I've only read three things, and I've got a tiny little thing that she wrote in lockdown, which is Intimations or something, small collection of essays. So yeah, I'm ambiguous on Zadie Smith. I need to read a bit more, but I haven't read
completely about White Teeth. White Teeth really does say, "Hey, I'm here now. You can't ignore me." It throws literally everything in your face and just let you sort it out. But you've never read Howard's End?
No.
Okay. Have you read Brideshead?
No, Steve. There are yawning lacunae in my canonical reading. I have missed out so much that I need to get to. I'm completely and utterly happy to reveal that here live.
But there's hardly anything more British than those two books. I mean, that I'm stunned. Just stunned.
Having
What about we're talking here about the heyday in the mid 80s, then the 90s, then moving into the aughts, and then even the novelty has worn off, the dopamine is worn off. A lot of these people are still writing, but it's not the same. There's something different about it. It doesn't feel like an in club anymore.
Yeah.
There was an American version of that
Yeah.
I scarcely ever hear you talk about. Is it just a regional thing? You are not so interested in, the Bret Easton Ellis or the Jay McInerney or even later on David Foster Wallace?
No, I tried. I tried Foster Wallace. I can't even bring it to mind. What's the huge, complicated thing that he wrote? I tried. I think I spent about 15 minutes with it, and it went through the window. I just couldn't even bother. I think I must have rented it from a library or something. I still haven't got it now, but I have. I do remember trying it, and I've had one or two sort outs of books since, and it will have been one of the victims of that. I haven't even bothered. So it's entirely regional, and most of the time it was the sort of modern use of index. So if Martin Amis would mention Nabokov, for example, he's the one that got me into Vladimir Nabokov. Who else? Who mentions a bit of Joyce, who I had to, I had to suffer through that. But he mentions quite a few. Right, so if they weren't mentioned by the people who got me into it, then it was. I wasn't one of those 16 and 17-year-olds that would sort of go around a library and have a look as to what was happening. I was looking at what my favorites would recommend or mention and attacking those.
So did Amos get you into Larkin? He loves Larkin.
Yes, I do have Larkin's a big guy in Hull. There's an enormous there's a great august statue of him in the train station because he's the only sort of famous person that wasn't a sportsman that came from my hometown, apart from Andrew Marvell and Wilberforce, who were around for a little while as well. But I've got the collection that Amos picked out of Larkin's poetry. My views on this are very well pronounced. I don't like it when people try and break the rules in poetry. I like things that scan. I like rhyming, and I like metrical poetry that adheres to certain standards. So Larkin's messing about, Ginsberg's messing about, anybody else that thinks that they're way better than to adhere to the construction rules I aren't bothered with. So I've got Larkin stuff, Wits and Weddings and all that. There's some memorable lines, but no, it didn't enamor me at all.
I feel the same way about poetry, obviously, but boy, oh boy, reading Inside Story. So often I am accustomed to writers dropping poets' names, and that's it. But Amos lives this poetry. He breathes it. It speaks about the world. He needs it to speak about the world. If you took Larkin out of Inside Story, half the pages would be blank. That's amazing to me. It might not be, the poet's never done that to me, but he definitely did it to one reader, one famous literary reader, and that's just incredible. But you mentioned one Salman Rushdie, so no others?
No, that's it. Obviously, everybody brings up the Satanic Verses. I haven't even tried that. I'm aware that lots of people hail him as a sort of a master technician and a good prose stylist, which obviously I'm always in for. So I'm sure I'll get round to him. But there's just so much more. As I've already shown you, there are enormously embarrassing gaps in my reading. So there are much more exigent issues I need to address than Salman Rushdie right now.
And Ian McEwan, you mentioned one book.
Yeah, just Atonement, as per usual.
Did you like Atonement?
Sure. Yeah. Nice. Yeah. But nothing that I could even, it doesn't bring up 4 adjectives that I could use right now to describe it. It's just sort of nice book, well done, mate, move on. Nothing well formed and thought out, but
so you have that gatekeeping crowd, and you can knock the tarnish off them, but you don't utterly dismiss them. It sounds like you're not utterly dismissing them. There, in addition to which, there's a note of gratitude. Everybody has a group of writers. Everybody has at least one writer that does that. In America, that writer is Stephen King.
Yeah.
And but everybody has that, and you don't like to let go of them. I don't. But you don't like to let go of them. You don't like to just dismiss them completely.
No, I mean it's an obviously it's an often arrived at conclusion, but without Martin Amis, if he hadn't taken up a pen and written, I really do doubt that I'd be stood in front of an iPad talking to somebody on the eastern coast of on the eastern seaboard of America with a 7-story bookcase here, having an appreciation and spending 3, 4, 5 hours doing something that I do now. Without those guys, I really do doubt, because I was a completely idiotic nerd that all it wanted to do was make sure that my heart produced enough oxygenated blood to carry to my muscles in order to perform in cycling. I really did not care about anything that I care about now.
So that group for a while anyway, provided you with recommendations of other things. That group had tentacles spreading out in all directions to other things,
Hmm.
and that provided recommendations. And also, obvious on your channel, the canon provides recommendations. The canon is just sitting there. You're not viewing it as covered in dust. It might be really vital, right? Really interesting. What about other recommendations? Do you get recommendations from BookTube? Do you watch a lot of BookTube?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not a huge watcher of book. I do have maybe 10 or 15 channels that I'll watch on a weekly basis. Obviously, if I want some more obscure books, obviously your mail halls, whatever the hell it is, you get mailed to you. I will always have a look at whenever you do a starter kit. Obviously, I've done the Western Canon starter kit. I've had a look at. I haven't acted upon, of course, because that would be ludicrous. But I've had a look at. But no, book recommendations. Yeah, it's just nowadays I am the type to go into a used bookstore and just browse the Penguin Classic section and see what it is that I haven't read. It's, you know, it's as simple as that, really. I don't take too many recommendations from too many people because I've already got. Obviously, there's the read what you own challenge. I've probably got 300, 400 books, and I've read 75% of them, I think. So I'm not one of these people that has an enormous amount of books that they haven't read. So I'm not look. I'm always looking to add to my collection. So I'm obviously always in used bookstores having a look for recommendations that just happen to be there, rather than having some saintly oracle like yourself, sir, giving me recommendations every week.
And is the used bookstore situation good?
Yeah, well, not super locally. So I've mentioned this before. There's one particular bookstore in it's called a place called Driffield, which is about an hour and a half away. Whenever me and my dad and extended family go around for a day out, I'll spend a good sort of 45 minutes in there, and that's an excellent shop. And the owner, I'm reliably informed by the owner that what's there is about 20% of everything that he's got. He must have some, some freight ship full of books somewhere off the coast. But in Hull in particular, which is a reasonable metropolis, it's the city of culture. It's got a bit of money now, and unfortunately, there are just embarrassingly few, and what few there are insignificant and small, and just not altogether that good. There are charity shops that I talked about with you, but actual dedicated secondhand bookshops aren't great. There's one Waterstones that we've talked about again before, that is obviously manic, given that it's the festive season. But beyond that, I certainly wouldn't pronounce the book scene here as healthy. The secondhand book scene is healthy.
Mm. So, well, enough for your needs. I'm assuming you would not shop online.
I have to. I like World of Books every now and then when there's the 3 for 4, whatever it is. It's buy three get one free or whatever, and everything's under £4, and you can get 4 books for £10 or £11 or £12. But beyond that, I don't shop on Amazon or anything. And that World of Books purchase is now becoming a rarity.
So that raises when you're out and about and you're browsing books and you're buying whatever strikes your interest. That
Mm.
raises two quintessential booktube questions. First of which is the percentages of fiction and nonfiction. Are you ever likely to pick up a big work of nonfiction?
Well, as I'm sure my endeared viewers will see, I did the whatever it is, ludicrous 1100-page Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by Shearer. So I'm not scared of a toe-crushing totem of nonfiction. But let's think. I don't know. I'm trying to do statistics on the fly. If I were to buy a huge, if I were to do a huge haul or 7 or 8 books on a book haul of a Sunday, probably 1 or 2 of them, especially since nonfiction November, 1 or 2 of them is likely to be a nonfiction work. So, and that's what most really, I wouldn't consider myself a casual reader, but most casual readers who read once or twice a day for 15 minutes or whatever before and after work. Most of my peers and contemporaries at university, for example, they would read nonfiction, so they find nonfiction stirring. But yeah, it's probably 20% nonfiction with me if I were to get a big payload of books.
Well, that touches on another question that I had about your reading time. How much time do you have to read?
Quite a lot, yeah, quite a lot. At least 3 or 4 hours a day if I'm not, messing about with friends or performing family duties or helping the poor in sub-Saharan Africa or all of the other wonderful things that I do. So yeah, I do generally have quite a lot of time to read books. Given that I'm at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday evening able to talk to you, and your darling dog on the internet.
I don't
That
know why she's
proves.
acting up. She's, what's the matter? What's wrong? What's the matter, baby? Something's gone on. I don't know what it is. Something's bothering her in her tiny little mind. But okay, so time to read, and it sounds like adequate means to buy secondhand books. Not as good as it could be, but not terrible either. There are plenty of people listening to us who have a terrible situation for used books. They don't have anything within hours and hours of driving. But what about the other quintessential booktube question? Print books versus ebooks. Do you do any ebook reading?
All of my ebook reading consists of articles that are produced that particular day. So I, thankfully, I'm about to take up a great opportunity. One of my loyal subscribers emailed me the other week saying that he has an unbelievable access to pretty much everything that's printed in Western Europe. So I will go online and read, stuff from The Guardian, stuff from, all sorts of political stuff. But as regards fiction, very rarely will I read anything online. I don't know what it is. It's that sort of usual primitive cave dwelling thing of liking the feel of a book. I haven't quite gotten around the fact that you can have literal libraries at your behest on an iPad. So I haven't quite got around to that. And yeah, I don't know. There's something about holding a book which is nice. And I know that's sort of anachronistic and sort of counterintuitive, but that's just how it is. It's most of my reading is done, especially fiction, on books. Anytime I need to read an article or stuff on just anything political, then it'll be online.
She doesn't usually do this. She didn't do this in our last talk. I'll just have to, she wants to be here, so I'll just have to.
Intrigued, that's all. She's stimulated by our chat, Steve. That's all.
Yeah, sorry for the dead-eyed stare there. I don't know what's the matter. I'm just talking with another human. That's all. So, what about annotating? Are you a big note taker? Did you annotate a lot in the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich?
Yes, so I have a pencil in hand, and my most of my margins are at least one or two things per page often. So I do underline and take an awful lot from it. Yeah.
So what is that though? Are you mostly note to yourself?
Yes, yeah. Some stuff to refer to. Just underlinings of neat and quotable passages. Just anything that springs to mind. Oh, this is what he's doing. This is where they are being successful. This is where they aren't being successful. This is stupid. This is crass. This is excellent. Just what's going through my mind is what I write in the annotation. So it might be something which is heavily involved with comprehension of the plot, or it might just be a sort of a step back, a little bit of a critical take on a passage. So it really does vary, and it would be a weird sort of bizarre experience to go through my annotations post reading. So if 6 months ago I read Middlemarch and went through it with a fine-tooth comb with my pencil, if I now went back to that, it would be like preternaturally observing a night out on the booze or something. Nothing would make sense. Everything would be wrong, and yeah, I wouldn't know what the hell it was I was noting down.
So sorry, I'm a little distracted here. She never does this. I've done a million of these. There we go. There you go. Okay. So I mentioned, you getting recommendations through the other authors that you read, but what about all of those periodicals that you mentioned, the Spectator and the Guardian and whatnot? They all have book sections. They all have working book reviewers. Any of those reviews ever tempt you to go out? There'll all be new books, but do any of them ever tempt you to go out and get the book?
Not really. I don't often read the book. As my Slashing at Hack series, where I take a rag from a supermarket or a publishing house every week, and I usually go through the current affairs that are usually going on in Britain. Some of them have book sections, and I look at them and admire them sometimes. But very, very rarely. I can't even think of one instance where I've read a review that has either been excoriatory or has commended it, and I've gone out and bought it. I very rarely take the advice of some of the book reviewers in there. If it's something that, for example, the Nadine Dorries book, the supposed conspiratorial David Icke endorsed book, The Plot to Oust Boris Johnson, or whatever the hell that thing's called. I've read 7 or 8 published reviews of that, and they've all said similar things. So when I know that a book is going to be asinine, or I know that it's going to be terrible, or if I've read the thing, heaven forbid, I will consult them. but it's not something I'd actually, actively seek. It would be something that I would inadvertently, happen upon if it was in the book that if it was in the magazine that I bought.
So the chain of events, if that were to happen, the stereotypical chain of events for you, if you did read, or you do read the periodicals and you do read the book reviews. So if you read a book review and it sold you on the book, the chain of events is that you would go to the Waterstones in Hull and get it.
Yes, yes, I've become more reticent to do that, because I was in Harrogate yesterday, for it was an extended weekend for my mother's birthday, and there's a Waterstones there with 3 or 4 floors, and I was looking at all sorts that there was everything about Rory Stewart's new book, James O'Brien's new book, and the aforementioned Nadine Dorries book, if we shall honour it as such. They were all there, but I turned the backs over, and they're £20, Steve. I could get 8 for that price, which are almost certainly going to be better at a used bookstore. It's I'm sorry that might just sound sort of really stupid, but it's just uneconomical. I just won't get £20 worth of joy out of the book, so I don't bother. But that would be a route that I used to take when I was a little bit more flippant with money. But I'm constricting myself just now.
Yeah, I think the same thing. I was momentarily tempted by an author named Philippa Langley, the woman who found the bones of Richard III in the car park in Leicester. She has a book about the princes in the Tower, and it's a favorite subject of mine. She totally exonerates Richard. He'd never heard of them. Wasn't related to them. Wasn't in the country. He was in America at the time. Whatever her excuse was, she totally exonerates him from that. I want to read that book. It's never going to have an American edition, and the UK edition is eye-wateringly expensive. So I make the same decision. Just no thanks. I'll watch her dumb documentary instead. We'll pass over in silence the frequent booktube speculation that you are one of the princes in the Tower, that you are the young George or the young Edward who managed to survive.
My lineage is well documented. I've done the spit tests on 23andMe. There is absolutely no aristocracy in me whatsoever. It's just a trained accent and a reasonable vocabulary, and some decent sartorial elegance every now and then. But no, there's absolutely nothing royal about me, Steve. You'll be happy to.
So what is on the horizon for you reading wise? Do you shape your reading very consciously, or do you look at booktube events or big things that I want to do? For instance, does the ending of the year have any effect on shaping your reading, or does that not matter at all?
Not really. No. Yeah, if there's a booktube event, obviously I'll pile 4 or 5 things that I'll get through for there. I do TBRs, but there's no method to that madness. I just gather 4 or 5 books that look nice, that I think will interest me, and pop them into a haul, and then feel morally obligated to read them because they've been on my YouTube channel. But no, I don't absolutely agonize over what it is that I'm going to be reading over the next week or 2 weeks or whatever. It's an indescribable process. I don't actually know how it is that I come to open one book and not another. I don't know what it is that drives me.
And dare I ask, do people in your life know about your booktube channel?
Yes, they do. Yes. Yeah. Well, it was because many of them, I would, whenever I read something nice or whenever I watch something on the television, I will instantly go to the kitchen, make a cup of tea, and do a 10-minute Donahue-esque rant about something. And somebody said, you need to popularize this. You need to find some sort of useful outlet for it, Joe. And so most of my family members were urging me to somewhat publicize these rants. And so most of them do actually know what it is that I do. I read a book, I write some notes about it, and then I talk to a camera, and somehow that goes out to people, and a couple of hundred people like it, and some people comment, and we have a chat, and all's well.
But you're saying that before that, there were just in the wild rants? just happened?
If these walls could talk, Stephen, Jesus.
So this booktube channel of yours was a product of pleading for relief from your nearest and dearest?
Yeah, exactly.
Why not let other people suffer? Well, I don't want YouTube to cut us off in mid-sentence. So I want to squeeze in one last question about your booktube channel, because your Slashing the Hacks videos often touch on politics. And I'm wondering, do you get pushback from people who who come to your channel or any booktube channel and want to talk about books and little else and feel like you're abrogating your own description when a lot of people just don't like politics to come up in a
Yeah,
video?
but it's not as if I'm bursting down their front door and you know, I'm. It's not as if I'm shouting in their face and interrupting their evening meal. I am making a video on the internet that I'm publishing, and you are watching it. And if you happen not to like what it is that I've produced, simply close the tab and go and pour yourself a glass of water and have a calm down. So no, it has been brought up, the old stick to books argument. Those people, I mean, fair enough, but if you want my honest opinion, if you can't countenance me talking about books and politics because it's something I like, then I'm sorry, but you're a troglodyte. You really do need to open your mind, because sometimes people talk about things that also interest them, and that politics happens to be that for me. So yeah, deal with it. It's essentially the modern way of saying.
That always confuses me. That stick to books. I've got that for just decades, It meant to be sort of a thought stopping utterance.
Yeah.
I have now killed any possibility of this conversation. I have uttered the unbeatable sentiment. I can only imagine what actors must feel. They get that all the time, or professional sports players.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing.
Oh,
Gary Lineker, who hosts a popular football show here in the UK, always talks about the malevolence of some of the Conservative government's immigration policy, and he's always said to stick to football. And yet, if he had a comment on Black Lives Matter, those people who purport to be bastions of free speech would be absolutely loving it. Whereas when they say something that he happens to disagree with, I mean, Grant Shapps, who I believe is still the Transport Secretary, who is paid £100,000 a year to govern a country, told him essentially to stick to sport the other day. So it's not just crotch itchers in their bedroom tombs that are saying this. It's people that are in the professional sphere that think that you should stick to your specialized lane and you shouldn't be a polymath of any description.
yeah.
So it is a weird modern contagion. It is.
Now well, it's not even modern. I mean, 50 years ago, there was a basketball player here in the United States, an extremely cultured guy. He happened to be really good on the basketball court, but he was an extremely cultured guy, extremely well read, and he would offer opinions on the latest controversies in American politics, and he lost count of how many times people told him shut up and dribble. What does that say? The critic is essentially implying that they can have interest in all sorts of things, but you can't. You can only have interest in one thing. And any opinion that you form, no matter how long it takes to form it, on any other subject will be dumb.
And can you imagine if that was done? It's usually done for quote unquote white collar workers, university educated people. If a labourer were to come on national television and say, I think such and such policy is iniquitous, and someone were to tell him to stick to bricklaying, they would rightly be called a huge snob and laughed out of court.
Right.
But when it's mental work that you don't use your hands and is apparently an easy trade, that's when you get shouted down often.
Well, not here.
Yeah, well, yeah.
But I do want to wrap this up before we get cut off. So we'll bid goodbye to BookTube, and we'll do this again. Yes, I have a million more questions.
Of course.
But in the meantime, bid my